I'm grateful I found a way out, but a lot of my friends are still suffering, you know. We all went over there as a whole, and we all come back broken into pieces.
Trauma at its core is a disempowering experience. Post-traumatic stress is a disempowering disorder. These practices are about re-empowering you.
I've worked with some vets who really thought that they were damaged because of something that they had done. And of course, what they had done were things that any human being, and depending on the causes and conditions, of course, that come together, anyone could have been in that position.
I would love and honor your veterans and believe them, believe their pain, even if they can't verbalize it. Be willing to see it.
PTSD is an overwhelming issue. It affects not just the person with PTSD, but their family, their friends, and so we've often said one person experiencing PTSD may affect hundreds of people in turn.
I would suggest that you take the same enthusiasm, motivation, and energy that you put into sending our troops into combat, into facilitating the healing when we get back.
Could we imagine a time that being a wounded warrior is not a life sentence, but a condition that we can engage and work through with compassionate acceptance? Working with veterans has touched me deeply. So many of them bear their mental scars with a dignity that I could hardly have imagined. There are approximately 4.8 million veterans currently living in the UK, and the rates of PTSD have increased over the past 10 years, with a 2018 King's College London study reporting that over 17% of UK combat veterans from the recent Iraq and Afghanistan wars were reporting PTSD. With mental health issues among serving UK Armed Forces personnel rising by 78% in the past 8 years, we have many more veterans to come who will surely be needing mental health support. My name's Charlie Morley, and I've been teaching lucid dreaming and mindfulness of dream and sleep, a holistic approach to sleep and dream work using mindfulness-based practices, for over 10 years. But it was 3 years ago that I first started working with veterans of the British Armed Forces. In 2016, I was invited to come and give a workshop at a mindfulness retreat for veterans being run by Keith Mackenzie, a Buddhist chaplain for the Armed Forces and a veteran of the Parachute Regiment, who had come to one of my lucid dreaming workshops a few years before and found that the lucid dreaming practices were helpful for his PTSD nightmares. In 2017, I applied for a Winston Churchill Fellowship to study best practice in mindfulness-based treatments for PTSD in veterans. The fellowship would take me to the US and Canada to see what practices were having the best results, and then come back to the UK and make recommendations to UK policymakers. The scholarship funding allowed me to travel to the US and Canada for 4 weeks of interviewing, studying, and training with some of the world's leading experts in mindfulness-based approaches to PTSD treatment. My travels took me from my home in London to San Francisco, to Oakland, to San Rafael, to Edmonton, Canada, to New York State, and back to San Francisco again. In this video, I want to share with you my findings, based primarily on the interviews that I conducted with the experts in the field in the US and Canada. But most importantly, I want to share with you my conclusions and recommendations on how what I learned in my fellowship has informed not only the work I continue to do with UK veterans, but the work I intend to do and the new workshop that I intend to create based on my findings. My first stop was San Francisco, which I found to be a colourful and vibrant city with a rich history and a thriving LGBTQ community. But what I also found was a huge and often underrepresented community of veterans, many of them homeless. 75% of San Francisco veterans reported, unsurprisingly, major difficulties in adjusting to civilian life. One of the many local veterans projects that kept on coming up in my research was Swords to Plowshares, a grassroots veterans charity whose mission is to heal wounds of war, restore dignity, and to prevent homelessness among San Francisco veterans. After visiting their drop-in center, I managed to secure an interview with their recently retired clinical programs manager, Leo Jocelyn, at his home in San Francisco. Leo began the interview by giving me a definition of what PTSD is and how its symptoms can affect veterans.
I've worked with some vets who really thought that they were damaged because of something that they had done. And of course, what they had done were things that any human being, and depending on the causes and conditions, of course, that come together, anyone could have been in that position. You know, like I've had one person tell me about abusing a prisoner of war and how badly he felt that he had done that, right? Another person wouldn't tell me what he did, but he said that it was so bad that not even God would forgive him. There's re-experiencing, right? And where it can be in the form of dreams or intrusive memories, okay? That's one of the symptoms. There's dissociation, where you want to push away. You want to push away, say, memories, feelings, any sort of like internal reminders or cues of the trauma. You know, you'll push them away. But the problem with that is that, you know, you kind of like, it's a disconnect from life, you know, and it's also a lot of the symptoms or a lot of the cues are just, you know, can be innocuous. They can be, you know, we all, you know, like if we hear a little sound, you know, that we're not expecting, you know, that can be like, you know, oh, what's that? You know, you know, as a safety measure, we need to check it out. But if we're really, you know, like if we're traumatized, then that becomes much, much louder. Right? And then there are physical, you know, the physical manifestations where there's, you know, hypervigilance, inability to, there's hyperarousal. You know, we're in an aroused state. It can affect sleep. That's another set of symptoms.
I asked Leo about some of the major challenges that he encountered when working with veterans. And he said something that I heard echoed again and again throughout this project. His three main challenges with veterans were working with stigma, shame, and self-medicated drug abuse.
Sometimes the work required to affect healing can be daunting, or it can be, in terms of mindfulness, it can be boring, sitting and watching your breath, right? So that it is difficult to get people engaged along those lines. And then there's the suffering that people go through. A lot of times it can be overwhelming, and so drug and alcohol use can get in the way. And people wanting to, you know, someone might be saying, oh, this is great, I'm going to work on this next week, you know, I'll see you in a week. And then you don't see them, you know, because they've gone on some sort of drug run. Or they drank way too much, you know, because the symptoms arise, and sometimes it's so painful, they do the best thing, or the first thing that they found work for them is, you know, self-medication with drugs and alcohol. That can get in the way. But one really, and this is just from overseeing these programs, and not just from my personal perspective, but something I see as a system thing, is the fact that a lot of therapists who would like to, who say that they believe in mindfulness practices and treatments that are mindfulness based, don't practice mindfulness themselves. And so they really can't really effectively deliver these treatments. You must be a practitioner in order to really be effective. So that's a huge challenge. And I think the vets know it. If this person's talking about mindfulness, they know they're just talking from a book or from, you know, they can pick it up.
These sentiments were echoed by Vietnam veteran Cliff Grady. Cliff is now a therapist himself, specializing in working with other veterans with PTSD. Cliff spoke candidly about the challenges that veterans have when seeking therapy of any sort.
I started getting referrals in for veterans through the military because I'm a veteran. And typically, most of the veterans, myself included, would want to talk with another veteran for maybe concerns that people who hadn't had that experience might judge them very critically for stuff, because how are civilians going to understand the insanity of war? Seriously, I mean, you can try to explain it, but you can watch it in the movies, and God knows Vietnam, where I was at, was on TV all the time. But it doesn't give you that immersion in how insane that is, where it can be absolutely calm and kind of boring. You're doing mundane stuff for days, maybe even weeks, and then, I wouldn't say weeks, but anyway, and all of a sudden it's just, it's chaos. It's chaos, and you're trying to pull together all your training and, to deal with the chaos.
My next stop took me to neighbouring Oakland, a thriving tech hub with a thriving veterans community and an even more thriving veterans yoga project running out of the Oakland Veterans Center.
My name is Dr. Daniel Libby. I am a clinical psychologist, and I founded and am the executive director of Veterans Yoga Project. Veterans Yoga Project is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting recovery and resilience among our veterans, families, and communities. There are a lot of different ways that you can look at how yoga is helpful for post-traumatic stress, for trauma. Traumatic events are essentially, or post-traumatic stress is essentially a psychophysiological condition. It is a mind-body problem. It is a trauma happens both in the mind and the body. And so the tools that we use are, again, there's a lot of different ways you can lay it out. The first way that yoga really helps with post-traumatic stress is by regulating the autonomic nervous system. For individuals who are dealing with post-traumatic stress, they are living with a nervous system that is a little bit dysregulated. So there are times when, physiologically you get too amped up and you're too on edge for the conditions that you're in at the moment, and other times you're down, depressed, and collapsed. And the practices of yoga help bring you inside what's often called the window of tolerance, or your optimal arousal zone. And this is the place where your physiology matches your environment and your goals, and you have the energy levels to live in line with your values and goals instead of being too amped up or not amped up enough. So the primary way that post-traumatic stress is helped by these yoga practices is by helping to regulate the nervous system. And that really helps take care of a lot of the initial symptoms that people are dealing with post-traumatic stress.
We want to create a space that's safe, predictable, and controllable. So, and that's not your typical public yoga class. So, we even set up the class differently. We don't have anybody behind anybody. We set ourselves up by the door, rather than, and usually in a typical yoga class, the teacher's going to face the door, everybody's going to come in. In Veterans Yoga Project, we don't do that, because veterans, especially veterans with PTSD, they're going to keep an eye on the door at all times. So if I'm sitting away from the door, then they're split focus. If I'm by the door, then I've got their attention because I'm by the door, and I know they're going to be looking at the door anyway. If you go into a restaurant with veterans, they're always sitting facing the doors. That's one of the practices we learn in Veterans Yoga Practice. So, and in a typical yoga class, they're not going to be about language, how they set up the class, what poses they do, So it's more about, for us, creating a safe, predictable, controlled environment. If I get up off my mat to do something, I tell the class, I'm getting up off my mat and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to soften the lights. I'm going to turn the thermostat down. I'm going to get so-and-so a prop to use. I tell them what I'm going to do so they know, so it becomes more predictable. That doesn't happen in a public yoga class.
Sounds great, but does this stuff actually work? Turns out these guys have got some serious data gathered for the beneficial effects of yoga with veterans. And time again throughout my fellowship, I found that yoga seemed to be one of the most beneficial treatments when working with veterans with PTSD.
The three most common benefits of yoga for the veterans that I've worked with, I would say, are alleviation of pain, physical pain. Chronic pain is a huge problem in our country, certainly among the veteran population, and yoga is now a first-line treatment, so all the pain societies are saying that this is actually the first thing somebody should be doing when they're dealing with a pain condition, and that is corroborated by our experience. And we're now collecting data on a lot of the veterans that are going through our programs, looking at what their pain level is before and after each class, and we're showing huge reductions. 84% of the time veterans are leaving our classes in less pain than they came into class with, and then over time we're seeing those numbers go down. So pain is probably the first thing that I hear most often about. Sleep would be the second most common symptom that I hear about that's helped with the practices of yoga. Many of the veterans that I work with use breathing, meditation, yoga nidra to help them get to sleep. They use these practices to help them get back to sleep, and when they wake up in the middle of the night with their racing thoughts or with nightmares, or if they're waking up too early in the morning. And so I would say sleep is the second maybe most common benefit that veterans receive from practicing yoga. And the third, I guess, would be just sort of mood regulation, right? When we get aligned with ourselves, when we do these practices, it helps balance our mood. It helps us deal with those lows and highs. So in 2017, Veterans Yoga Project, we documented 17,759 visits. So these are veterans and family members who have coming to classes that are taught by VYP trained teachers, and the teachers who have then, stayed in touch with us and shared their data with us, and we've shared support with them. And maybe out of 1,200 of those visits, we were able to start piloting this program where we're collecting pain and stress scores. So at the beginning of class, what's your stress level on a scale of 0 to 10? At the beginning of class, what's your pain level on a scale of 0 to 10? And again, we're getting, across a pretty large sample size, anywhere from 84 to 94% reductions, or 84 to 94% of the time where the veterans are leaving class in less pain than they came in with, and even higher numbers for distress. And the amount of that reduction, when we're dealing with, even if you're looking at the veterans who are coming in that are in chronic pain and they have a 5 or more, right, the percent reductions they get, they're going down by 2, 3, 4, 5 points on a 10-point scale.
For me, one of the most important things that I see is community, where veterans are getting together, younger veterans, older veterans. I see them starting to socialize with each other in class, after class, where they're talking. And I think that's probably a huge benefit, is that it's veterans sharing this yoga practice with other veterans. And it's almost like a book club where they're really connecting with each other. And I think that's a huge benefit. They're getting deep relaxation, and they're learning tools. I've had veterans share with me, veterans who have trouble sleeping at night, that they'll take some of the breathing practices we've done in class, and they'll actually lie in bed and do the breathing practices. And before they know it, they're asleep. And the next thing they know, they wake up after 8 hours. So the breathing practices are also really important. And then, of course, the movement practices gets them feeling comfortable being in their own bodies. But I've had veterans tell me that it's helped them with their sleep, that it's helped them with pain, where they've actually reduced their pain meds. I've had veterans tell me they've reduced their blood pressure medication. I've had veterans tell me, actually I had one veteran share with me one time something a little scary. He said that the classes were on Monday, and he says he doesn't feel like shooting somebody until Wednesdays, where it used to be always on Mondays.
Right. Trauma at its core is a disempowering experience. Post-traumatic stress is a disempowering disorder. These practices are about re-empowering you. They're about connecting you with your own mind, your own body, your own will and ability to make your goals and visions for the world come true, right? For you to live in live in line with your values and goals.
From Oakland, I made the journey back to San Francisco and then over the Golden Gate Bridge to San Rafael to meet with Dr. Richard Miller and Stephanie Lopez of the iRest Institute. Richard Miller created something called iRest Yoga Nidra Meditation, which has some amazing scientifically validated reports of how well it can help veterans with PTSD trauma. I caught up with both Richard and his lead teacher, Stephanie Lopez, to discuss exactly how iRest works. Yoga Nidra is often called yogic sleep, and is a deeply relaxing form of meditation, usually done lying down, which brings meditative awareness into the hypnagogic state just before sleep. This is a state in which our brain waves move into deep alpha and theta, which allows the parasympathetic nervous system to become deeply engaged. This is a highly nourishing experience for both the body and brain, which has been scientifically proven to optimize both mental and physical health. So what is iRest Yoga Nidra Meditation exactly? And why is it so good for working with veterans with PTSD?
You know, it's a modern day secular adaptation of an ancient practice of yogic meditation known as Yoga Nidra. And Richard has formulated it into a 10-step protocol. And it's incredibly user-friendly and understandable, easy to learn, approachable. You can do it lying down, sitting up. There's no wrong way to do the practice.
PTSD is something that some people may carry with them the rest of their life, so they need the tools so that when they're out and about in their mainstream life and something triggers them into an old experience of their post-traumatic stress and they start having this emotion or difficult memory, they have an easy access tool they can put right into place right then and there and work through or integrate the experience they're having. So 10 easy steps that they can practice in the comfort of their own home, because many vets don't want to come into the VA. They don't want to be labeled, or they've had very bad experiences. So a lot of active duty actually using our protocol in the field. So they may go out on a sortie and then come back, and because of some experience they have, they'll put on their earphones, they'll practice the protocol and try to work through the emotions, the memories, the visual images that were disturbing them, so they can come back to a sense of resilience.
I'm not good enough, I'm broken. If only somebody knew what really happened, they'd see the real me. I'm unlovable, I'm fill in the blank. We all live with these, but if we've experienced trauma, there can be specific versions that are going on in our unconscious. And so through this practice, we bring them out into the light, and we slowly but surely find a way to see, well, what was really happening when this was coming up? How can I meet this in meditation and understand its message and recognize that there might be something else here that's much more true about who I am.
In the final week of my Churchill Fellowship, I actually trained to become a level 1 iRest teacher, and I saw just how effective firsthand the iRest protocol was at bringing both civilians and veterans into a deep state of relaxation. But let's hear more from both Richard and Stephanie about the scientific research that has been done into the benefits of iRest Yoga Nidra.
When the military approached me, I have a wonderful video of this one Marine saying, "We're Marines, we're military, we don't do yoga, we don't do meditation, that's for sissies." So they said, call it something else. So I thought long and hard and came up with the name Integrative Restoration. Integrative because I think the practice integrates our sense of psychology and helps us become an individuated human being, friendly with our emotions and our body and our thoughts. And then restoration, because I feel the practice restores us or helps us recognize this deep, unchanging aspect of joy and well-being. And back in 2004-05, when I was starting to enter into this study, everything was iPhone and iPad and this, so why not iRest? So it became known as Integrative Restoration, iRest. And they said, we can do iRest. I said, great. What's interesting is they came back a year later after the study was completed, which was very successful. And we did it at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. And as a result of the study, they integrated it right into the healing clinic at Walter Reed. So since 2006, when the study was finished, any wounded warrior going through their healing process at Walter Reed has access to this healing protocol that has now become iRest. But what's interesting, they came back to me and they said, we like what you're doing. You can call it anything you want. A military veteran said to me, after doing iRest, every healing regimen that he had been in up until this time that was addressing his symptoms of PTSD, he said they were always addressing what's wrong with me. You're the first protocol that has helped me understand what's right about me from the very beginning, and from there then to address what does need healing.
The iRest protocol, we've divided that up into 3 steps. So those are the first 3 steps of the protocol, which is setting an intention for the practice, opening into a heartfelt desire, or for the military, we talk about it as a heartfelt mission, because, in the military or with veterans, we know how to implement our mission, right? And then, of course, the inner resource.
Number 1, they feel safe. I think that's the number 1 element that I want to try to elicit from the very beginning. So that means a safe environment where they can disclose without feeling at odds with anything. So for instance, we want a room where they can put their back against a wall and they can see the windows and the doors, where they can relax. And the second one is I want them to feel safe with me. So I want them to feel that I'm not here to try to fix them, change them, talk them out of anything. I'm here to really meet them where they are. So they really feel a sense of an alliance in our relationship. Because for healing, I think it is the relationship between the person who is coming in for healing and the person that they're visiting for healing. It's the relationship that actually does a lot of the work. So I want an environment, and then I want that sense of trust and safety. And this is something that veterans have often said to us. They love the program of iRest because it is highly structured, easy to follow, and each of the steps itself is structured through a number of different ways that we build within each step.
Dr. Richard Brown and Dr. Patricia Gerbag are world experts in the field of breath-based approaches to trauma. Their pioneering breath-body-mind approach uses evidence-based techniques from yoga, breathwork, and even martial arts, alongside scientifically validated, coherent breathing practices to help people learn to breathe again and live again fully.
Dr. Richard Brown. I'm an associate professor of clinical psychiatry at Columbia University in New York City. The program we teach involves movement, breathing, meditation in that sequence. And we find that it has a profound effect in so many areas for veterans as well as active duty military. So the core breathing we teach brings about optimal performance in all systems in the body. And there's such interesting research exploding about it. So the brain works better, the heart and lungs work better. Everything you can measure in the laboratory, it works better, and it lasts for hours after a round of the core breathing. A lot of physical movement with conscious breathing is very important. And the more breathing I get in, the more stress release. Just doing postures is not enough. That will help depression some. It has little impact on post-traumatic stress disorder. Doing breathing has the most profound effect on post-traumatic stress disorder. And trying to just do meditation alone is too hard for most people because meditation will magnify whatever your inner state is. But doing conscious movement in a group in itself has an effect on improving people's physical and emotional well-being. There's very interesting research on that has begun recently. So we do something that we found it worked well, and it was partly how I was trained in martial arts. And these core techniques came from martial arts, although they were used for spiritual practice and physical healing. And so Doing a movement in a group is very healing in itself. Coordinated movement together at the same time. And putting the breathing in also really helped. There are 3 aspects to the breathing. One is breathing at about 5 breaths per minute, and that has different names in the medical scientific literature. Coherent breathing was coined by Stephen Elliott. Resonant breathing was coined by a cardiologist in Milan, Italy, Luciano Bernardi. Both refer to the fact that when you're doing this breathing, a coherent resonant rhythm is set up between your mind, body, and spirit complex. The 3 components to the breathing are, first, the breathing at 5 breaths per minute, and I commonly use the term coherent breathing because we use chimes or bells to pace people in it that were developed by Stephen Elliott at coherence.com. The second part, what in America is often called ocean breath, which in Sanskrit is called ujjayi breathing, meaning victory over the mind through the breath. We teach that. We think that additionally enhances the effect of breathing at 5 breaths per minute, although I have many teachers, they'll teach hundreds of people at a time in Africa or Asia, just breathing at 5 breaths per minute with wonderful healing in terms of post-traumatic stress disorder.
These 2 psychiatrists are leading lights in the field of body and breath treatment for PTSD in veterans, and their practices have been used by the US military and the US Veterans Associations extensively.
My name is Dr. Patricia Gerbarg. I am an integrative psychiatrist, which means I combine standard and complementary treatments to attain the best outcomes for folks that we can while minimizing medication. Military training, as we understand it, includes training the mind, the emotions, and the body to be in a constant state of defense, which is necessary to survive in battle. Makes sense. The problem we are encountering is that when warriors return home from the battlefield, they don't know how to turn off this defense war state of being in order to adapt to civilized life with their families and their communities. We are using movement and breathing practices that activate a particular part of the nervous system that we call the parasympathetic system, and also that kind of tell the defense reactions to stand down. So this is a bottom-up method of treatment. We know that many traditional treatments like cognitive treatment and psychotherapy are top-down. We talk to the brain and we hope that it will penetrate down into the emotions and the body. Well, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. So this is an additional way of actually using the body to tell the brain, calm down, stand down, conditions are safe. The brain listens to the lungs because breathing is our most vital function. And if anything changes, the brain has to respond quickly. So what we've discovered is that particular breathing practices will tell the brain, calm, stand down, relax, time to soothe, heal, recover, and also the messages go to the emotional centers and they actually turn on what's called the social engagement system. And that's the part of our brain and our mind that enables us to relate to people in a close, meaningful, intimate, loving, compassionate way. That's what we need in order to have loving relationships. One of our teachers has done tremendous work at the Albany Veterans Administration Center, where she's trained staff and veterans, and they love this program. It makes them feel better, it's fun, it's self-empowering, non-stigmatizing, because, we're not talking drugs or anything like that. It's very simple. And, warriors are used to physical training and physical practices, and this is a physical practice. Using your body to heal your mind and your spirit.
After a few days back in the UK, I flew back out to San Francisco for the final leg of my fellowship. Level 1 teacher training in Yoga Nidra at the Integral Yoga Institute. Over this time, I not only learnt how to teach eye rest and spent several days learning directly from Stephanie Lopez. But I also met 2 military veterans on the course who gave me insights into PTSD and trauma from a first-hand perspective. Cliff Grady served in Vietnam, and Nick Matafis served in Afghanistan. I found there to be wonderful serendipity in the fact that the last 2 people I interviewed were veterans themselves, as if veterans quite literally had the final word on my fellowship. Cliff Grady offered deep and open-hearted reflections on his time in Vietnam, and also spoke about the difficulty that many vets have in seeking help.
We give lip service to caring about our veterans, especially the guys that are out of the service. And then the guys in the service, another hard thing is if you have PTSD, that's not considered a wound, and it's a horrible wound. You can't always see wounds. And so when wounds are invisible, we tend to think of people as malingerers, like back injuries. They must be a gold brick. I would love and honor your veterans and believe them, believe their pain, even if they can't verbalize it. Be willing to see it. And I think the people that have handled this the best I've ever heard of are Native American tribes in history. I don't know if they still do this or not, but in old Western times, if you will, when a young warrior came back from a battle, whether it was long or short, he was welcomed back into the village with honor. Sometimes they were basically fed and bathed and taken care of in kind of sanctuary, not isolation, but sanctuary. And then coming back out to a huge gathering, welcoming, and they got welcome when they rode in, they got taken care of for several days, maybe sometimes longer, but they had a ritual. We don't have rituals. We need to have rituals to welcome people back in so they feel part of the community again, because they're not always going to be in the service. And they're going to get lost out there, like in a huge city here in San Francisco. We have so many homeless veterans over here, that's inexcusable to me.
And Nick, he was the kind of guy who had this deep, calm, stable energy that you could really feel, and that you only really feel from people who've weathered the harshest of storms and come out the other side, rooted and stable. Nick offered amazing insights into what it's like to be not only a veteran, but also teaching veterans as well.
What do I do? Well, I teach yoga. I'm a yoga therapist. I work at the John D. Dingle Medical Center, VA in Detroit, Michigan. Well, my initial connection to working with veterans is that I'm a combat veteran. I didn't know that I would be working with veterans. Matter of fact, I wouldn't even necessarily say it was a goal of mine at any time when I got back from Afghanistan or dealt with my own things. But I realized after I started my own yoga practice years ago that, and just still being in contact with my buddies, my battle buddies, right, the guys that I deployed with, and I'm grateful I found a way out, but a lot of my friends are still suffering, we all went over there as a whole, and we all come back broken into pieces, and I've been guided into this seat to help them heal.
So what have I learned? And more importantly, what steps am I going to take to implement what I've learned? If you ask me to summarize my findings, in my Churchill Fellowship, studying PTSD treatment in veterans, a mindfulness-based approach, I could sum it up in 4 words: body, breath, sleep, and meditation. These were the 4 aspects that kept on coming back time and time again in the treatments that were most validly beneficial for veterans with PTSD. Body. Talking therapy alone is not effective in working with PTSD. The veterans have to use embodiment in some way, such as yoga, exercise, or movement practices. Breath. Intentional breath is the best way to regulate the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. If veterans can learn to breathe, they can learn to calm their psychophysical systems and move themselves out of anxiety and the malfunctioning fight or flight response. The body, breath, mind approach of coherent breathing was by far the most effective of these that I encountered. Sleep. We spend 1/3 of our lives asleep. Chronic lack of sleep affects every biological process in a harmful way. Not only were practices that helped the veterans sleep the most effective, but also better sleep was found to be a symptom of almost all the effective practices. Meditation. Mindfulness meditation has been proven over and over again to have measurable mental health benefits. But these are not just found in sitting mindfulness. Every one of the modalities I studied had an element of mindfulness training to it, whether through breath work, body-based yoga, sleep-based yoga, or even the EMDR process itself. Mindfulness is integral to PTSD integration due to the brain networks that are switched off by trauma coming back online through mindfulness training, allowing for full integration. I truly hope that the findings of my Winston Churchill Fellowship are enough to implement at least some change in UK policymakers when working with veterans and treatments that can help them. But don't take my word for it. I asked every person I interviewed at the end of every interview to look straight down the lens and to offer a message to the UK government saying how they can best help veterans in this country. Some of the comments I received were really moving, and I hope that they are enough to move policymakers who might be watching this video to move into a deeper respect, deeper help, and deeper benefit when working with the veterans of the UK.
Wow, that's a good one. If I had any advice for the UK government on supporting veterans who are recovering from trauma, well, one, incorporate yoga, right? Incorporate tools that are going to re-empower veterans. None of the veterans that I work with want to be on medications, and the medications in general don't work that well anyway. The tools that these mind-body practices offer re-empower the best assets in our communities. I know here in the States, right, our veterans are our best assets. These are the most well-trained, the people that have an inner desire to help and serve and protect. And these are the men and women that we are trying to re-empower. And the tools of meditation, yoga, breathing are tools that are going to re-empower these heroes so that they can continue to be assets for our communities.
As one veteran said to me, I now understand that all of what I did serving in the military is part of my experience, and I carry that with me. But we want to give them healing tools with which they can heal through their PTSD or feel that they have the tools to work with their PTSD that might follow them for the rest of their life.
I would say love them and respect them and welcome them home. Do everything you can to take care of them. Okay, and that's our responsibility, because we the people are the ones who send them to war. We do it through our elected officials, and I know this is to the UK, but like here in the United States, and I think it's the same thing over there, right? Is that our elected officials are the ones who send our young people off to war. Right? And sometimes our older people go along too, but mainly young people. We're sending our children to war.
Talk therapy is great, but it's all in the prefrontal cortex. Trauma is embedded in the emotional brain, and when we do these practices like breathing practices, like moving practices, we start to connect with the emotional brain, which then makes the talking part of the therapy in the prefrontal cortex, sorry for getting technical, but that's what makes that more effective.
I know that your National Health Service is very interested in mind-body practices, and our government is taking an interest too. In fact, it's now become a mandatory component of the treatment of veterans. The problem here, of course, is that our government doesn't yet know what are the best practices, but they are trying. I hope that you'll listen to what we've had to say.
I would suggest that you take the same enthusiasm, motivation, and energy that you put into sending our troops into combat, into facilitating the healing when we get back. Because we put everything we had into serving, and nothing would feel better to know that our government has our back when we get back and helping us put the pieces back together.